The Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our ServiceNow series, where we interview the best and brightest of the industry to share their story, advice, and views on the exciting world of ServiceNow and digital transformation.
Hello everybody, it's Mark Kelly here, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International. I hope you're doing really well. Today, as part of our ServiceNow podcast series, I'm very happy to welcome Tricia Gilbert. Tricia is Director of ServiceNow Practice Head at Fujitsu North America. Tricia, great to have you on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Tricia, tell us a little bit about your journey to now. How you got into the world of ServiceNow?
It was a strange journey. It took a lot of left turns and right turns, but I started off as an IT auditor, and I was really not in IT until there was a posting for a change manager. And so I jumped into the IT world mid-career, and I went from there and just did more operations roles that involved IT service management, it involved team management. It also involved service desk and operations pieces. And then the more time I spent in that world, it just took on more understanding of the management of IT in general. So I actually grew my understanding there. And sometime, I'm going to say 10 years back, there was an opportunity to jump from a role at a corporate company into a consulting role. And in that consulting role, I was responsible for helping companies move off tools or design tools, and ServiceNow was one of them. And so I didn't select it, but at the time, ServiceNow was making incredible headwinds in terms of its ability to move people off of, at the time, the tools were around either Remedy or HB and some of the other ones. And so that's kind of how I got to the place of being a ServiceNow platform, was through becoming a consultant. And then I just haven't looked back. As a consultant, I was mostly helping companies. And now my job is to help teams build a practice that's world-class to focus on delivering solutions around ServiceNow. And that's how I got here.
I love that background because you've touched so many different areas and you've seen it from different perspectives, which is really nice. And you're kind of walking in other people's shoes. And there's a lot to be said for that, because empathy comes from that, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later. And your role at Fujitsu, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So my role at Fujitsu is actually to build the practice in North America. That includes the United States and Canada, for our region. I am part of a more global family with Fujitsu, because Fujitsu is a global company. So I'm not only responsible for building out and strengthening the practice in Fujitsu North America, I also have responsibilities at a global level to ensure that we're harmonizing with solutions at that level as well. My overall responsibilities is for growth of the practice. I have also responsibility to ensure that as we're meeting the growth of the practice, we're also specializing and make sure that we're growing the team with the right types of talent, that we're also meeting our level of quality for our customers, which is super important. And the other aspect of my job is, besides developing the people and developing this growth plan, is to come up and make sure that we're delivering products and offerings to the market that are forward thinking, that help meet our clients at where they are. And we're also having to differentiate ourselves in a very competitive landscape. So there is a focus overall at Fujitsu, which is on sustainability, on improving the planet, and being innovative while we do that. So those aspirational goals globally, we try to pull into the practice. And I would say my role is to harmonize the Fujitsu mindset to how we deliver for ServiceNow at Fujitsu North America.
So when we look at the problem definition, and we talk in this podcast an awful lot about the importance of solving the problem and defining the right problem and getting stakeholders involved in that. But empathy is important in that journey. And there's challenges and blind spots to be aware of through implementation. Talk us through the importance of that.
Well, I think because we're dealing with technology, there's obviously a rush to draw the solution from the technological point of view. I actually think that technological view comes a little bit later once you've gotten to the heart of the problem, or you've gotten to an understanding of what that company or government entity, what they feel their problem is, because their definition of success is not necessarily ours. When they're going to measure us on quality, or they're going to measure us on our ability to remediate their gaps or address their business problems, we definitely have to all be on the same page. And you get that way through empathy. You get that way through connecting with your client. You get that way for building the trust with your client, because sometimes getting there is open dialogue and being able to have conversations with your client like you would a best friend over a cup of coffee. And that might mean they have to hear things that they might not have known were a problem. A good example is a company was really focused in operations, and they had a lot of emphasis on trying to fix operation issues. This was actually a change management. They were very not happy with their IT change management process, and they had invested quite a bit of money for us to come in and fix that. And guess what? It wasn't a change management issue. It was a demand issue. It was the inability to absorb demand coming from the business. So the bottlenecks around change management were really about managing demand, which is a little higher up in the process. So having the empathy to have conversations about what the real problems are and how to fix them. If you don't connect with your client and you're running off a technical run sheet, you're likely to blast into a situation and fail to address something that would be meaningful for your client. And that connectedness and that empathy is really where I think the value comes.
Sometimes you can get things done, but it can be done to them rather than them actually
Right.
feeling like they're going along on the journey. Because although you get the implementation done, the person doesn't necessarily feel like they're bought in or they're not resonating. I kind of shy away from adoption.
Correct. And you also want to be a coach. I think there's somewhat of an outdated concept that as a consultant, you're the kind of, you come in and you're somehow smarter than the client. The more modern model for having conversations is to treat people with respect, treat them as equals, and help them, guide them to the discovery themselves. You don't necessarily want to be in a situation where you're dictating, or it appears like you're dictating to your client, but you do want your client to feel good about the changes that they're making. And they need to be left with the sense of confidence that they can manage the platform without you and be able to be self-sufficient and self-reliant. So all of those aspects of empowerment and connectedness is important to resolve that particular solution. It's also really about making sure you're building long-term customers and fans. You want to build raving fans. You want people to have confidence and to continue to call you for whatever their future needs are.
You are listening to the Alldus podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.alldus.com.
There's so much new innovation coming down the track. We've got Tokyo on the way, and people can get overwhelmed. People who work in this work day to day can get overwhelmed, not to mention the people who are going on this journey for the first time. How do you manage an overwhelm? How do you kind of have that high quality, taking these people on the journey as that guide and just taking, here's where you rest, here's where we do another sprint, this is where we regroup. How do you actually try to plan that out?
So we do a couple of things. One is we have a delivery model. So, and that delivery model is how do you work in engagement? And the part of that delivery model has a customer component, which is during the phases of walking through the model, there's expectations that the customer will need and do, and then there's the things that we would do. Having an engagement model is critical because it also gives the customer confidence that you do have a prescribed approach to implementation, or you do have a prescribed approach to platform governance. And so you do need to come with a package. You can't just necessarily show up with just ServiceNow knowledge. You need to know how to tie it all together. And more importantly, you need to tie it all together in a way that you can bring your customers through that journey so they get the value, they don't feel overwhelmed. And you're, like I said, you're meeting the customer where you are. So the model is really important. The other thing too that people often overlook is the organizational change component. So for instance, somebody that's going to be managing the platform, they're going to need a different level of training and oversight to ensure their success versus maybe an executive who's only interfacing through, say, like a portal, and that person wants to buy a mobile phone on an internal site. That level of organizational change is completely different. But it can't be understated that it's really about the customer experience, not necessarily giving somebody a training lesson on the technology. So that one is and it's personal, it's intimate. And it has very little to do with technology. It just has to do with making sure that when that technology is enabled, people get the most out of it, and the people who have to maintain that technology know how to do it and they're confident.
This is another question that was actually posed from our previous guest that's kind of personal to you. Overcoming a challenging implementation, maybe looking back early in your career, anything that kind of jumps out at you that you share now, because people always talk about the good sides. They don't necessarily talk about some of the challenging side where arguably you learn a lot more. I know I've learned a lot more from my challenges.
I think the challenges early in my career were an absence of not really connecting on that people component. Even within IT, where most people have an understanding of ITIL or IT service management, just because they understand it doesn't mean they know how to automatically apply it in new situations. So there was, we were actually swapping out an older platform for ServiceNow. And even though the leap between those two things didn't appear to be that much change, in reality, it was a pretty significant change for the department. And the lesson there was even in IT, where we think we know all this stuff because it's an IT framework, it still requires diligence and care in terms of training and making people successful.
When you look at the challenges, the experience, and it all coming together, you'd adapt yourself to playing the field. But the whole world is changing so quickly, and innovation is driving so many different changes, and customers' problems are becoming a lot more complicated. You've got a nice question to ask our next guest. Would you mind sharing it with us, Patricia?
I think the question I would ask is, where do you see your role in IT service management 10 years from now or 15 years from now? It's evolved so much. The technology has evolved so much. Where do you see the future of that going? And I think that's a compelling question because everything is just moving so fast that what we're solutioning for today is not going to be relevant or as relevant 10 or 15 years from now. And it would be interesting to see how people might be thinking about that.
Yeah, so I can't wait to ask that question. It's a fantastic question to contestant to ask. The next 3 years are going to be really interesting. Let's know the next 10 years. You've been listening to the Alldus podcast. My name is Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus International. As part of our ServiceNow series, I'm delighted to say that we've been chatting with Tricia Gilbert. Tricia is the Director of ServiceNow Practice Head of Fujitsu North America. Tricia's been talking a little bit about connection, how to ensure empathy and trust with the implementation, how you manage overwhelm. We had a little bit of a background about learns and experience from actually going into implementations and how you can just have that connection with the customer and the importance of it. And there was a really nice question posed by Tricia for our next guest. Where do they think their role in IT service management will go in the next 10 years, which I'm really excited to hear about and share with you guys in the future. Thank you very much for your time, Tricia.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.